to get to Keaveney, where they would be sold to the Turks or Europeans. And it was a real ghostly experience. There was nobody there. No other tourists were there. Couldn't hear any dogs barking, no birds tweeting or chirping or whatever birds do. The wind didn't even seem to be blowing in the trees. And let me show you a number of pictures of Keaveney. This would be comparable to Goree Island or Cape Coast or Elmina or Fort James or Badagry or many other places of horror where our ancestors were kept. And maybe this was the most horrible to me because it's in such a state of decay. And all these are from Keaveney. I don't know anybody else that's been there. Now, of the 121 countries I've been to, some of them have been very joyful, delighted to be there. Some I went to see the museum, some for the temples and architecture. But this place was really foreboding. Some of these places, you seem to be able to feel the spirit of the ancestors stronger than other places, almost tangible. The female dungeon, that's always the most difficult place for me to enter into. Although on Goree Island you have an infant's dungeon. Who would enslave a child? The same people who enslaved you. And said they did it for your own good. This was my driver. Looking into the women's dungeon. Okay, let me finish with Keaveney. Sometimes it's even difficult talking about these places. But a sister, one time I used to do a lot of presentations on black folk in Australia and Tasmania. One guy sent me a whole series of books, rare books, on black people in Tasmania and all the things that the British had done to them, the English settlers. And I took those books and I put them behind a television, so I didn't even have to see the books. But now and then I'd be called upon to do a presentation and I would explain my reluctance, my hesitation to talk about it. It's not fun. And the sister says, Runoko, if it's unpleasant for you to discuss it, imagine what it was like for the people who endured it. And if they can endure it, you can at least talk about it and tell their story. We have a duty to tell the story of these sisters and brothers. We have an obligation to do that. From ancient Carthage, in Yemen, now these are little tiny pictures, these are not mine now. There's a map, that's a good one, of Yemen. Yemen, also good. But these are the small pictures. And these are the people called Akdam, A-C-H-D-A-M. The Akdam are the Untouchables of Yemen. And they're the descendants of an African army that went from Ethiopia to Yemen about 1,400 years ago. And the descendants are still there, and they are treated like untouchables, as outcasts. They are the lowest of the low, and they are called Akdam. Just look at the eyes. Don't they seem to tell the story? And finally, I want to finish in Zanzibar. All these pictures I took myself. And I took these pictures in May of this year. I don't think I've been back since then, so these will be new for you. If you're a Facebook friend, you may have seen some of them before. But I'm going to show a whole sequence, and I'm going to finish with that, and then we can have some discussion. I had taken a group to Ethiopia, and I took a group to Kenya, and I had two very successful tours. And I decided, since I had made a little money, and I had done good, that I could afford to go off on my own to other parts of Africa without the responsibility of being with a group. So first things first, I went to Zanzibar. I've been in Dar es Salaam before and tried to get to Zanzibar, but I never made it on the ferry. I went to Malawi, which is a great trip. But everybody kept, not everybody, but many people kept saying, Runoko, you must go to Zanzibar. There's so much history there. You need to go. You learn so much. So I said, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go. I had a couple pages in my passport, a little money, why not? So I booked my own ticket, I booked my own hotel. Nobody really knew where I was. And I figured I'd go there and stay for 5 days and just chill, book a nice hotel and enjoy myself. And the ancestor said, no, my brother, we got another plan for you. Just scrap all that. We're going to introduce you to the East African slave trade, whether you like it or not, Runoko Rashidi. And that's what they did. And it was a chilling experience, and many things happened that I'm still not able to reconcile. I'm not able to logically explain a lot of the occurrences that happened. From the beginning, from the time I left the airport, one thing after another happened. Now that's a lecture in and of itself. Make a long story short, a brother ended up picking me up from the airport and driving me to my hotel in a place called Stone Town. And he insisted I sit in the front, not in the back like a regular taxi driver would allow me to do, and never stop talking. His name was Muhammad. And I said, I'm gonna be here for 4 or 5 days, I don't have any plans. He says, okay, then tomorrow morning we agreed, I'll pick you up at your hotel at 9 o'clock and drive you around. Now after I got to my hotel, and Stone Town's a little bitty place, I figured I could really do this on my own, and I didn't want to spend the money anyway. And I didn't want to hang out with this brother. I could just do it myself and walk. And walking is my least favorite activity. But I said I'd do it. So I left a message at the hotel. If the driver comes, tell him I'm gone and I won't need his services. And I left about 8:30. And I started walking. And I found this church that was built on top of a slave auction. I found it, and they had a memorial there, and they actually had a little museum there, much to my astonishment. Now when I got there, there were a bunch of brothers who wanted to guide me around for a fee. I said, no, I can figure it out myself. So I went through the museum, and it was horrible. And it was hot. And when I left, I'm thinking, I wish that taxi driver was here, because I don't want to walk back to my hotel. Who should I run into? Now, how did he know I was going to be there at that particular time? But I was just glad to have a taxi. So he drives me back to the hotel, and on the way, we meet another guide who starts telling me about all the things to do in Zanzibar, none of which I wanted to do. And then to top it off, I said, how much will all this cost? He gave me an astronomical fee. I think I gave him the middle finger. I was that man. I'd already seen the slavery, and so I wasn't in a good mood anyway. I said, forget it. I jumped out of the taxi when it got to the hotel, didn't even pay him, because I gave him a big tip the day before, figured that would be enough. I didn't even close the door. I left the taxi door open. The ugly African American emerged from me. And I went to the hotel, and the taxi driver did something he was not supposed to do. He followed me in the hotel. That's a no-no. And I finally calmed down. You know, I lose my temper. I can have a diva in me, and then I'll calm down and say, okay, you can film it. It's no problem. Once I come to myself. And so we agreed on a price, and he says, okay, I'm going to take you someplace about an hour from here. The price is reasonable. We'll go at 9 o'clock tomorrow. And it has something to do with slavery, since I understand that's what you want. And this is where he took me. Now, on June 5th, 1873, the British abolished slavery in East Africa. It has served their purpose. They didn't have to have it anymore. But the Arabs thought it was very profitable, and they kept it going. But because the British had a big stick, the Arabs had to hide the captured Africans. And this is one of the places that they hid them. And it's maybe the most horrible place I've been to, and I've been to a lot of places. So I went down there, and I went down here, and I started to go down there, and the brother, the taxi driver, held me back. He said, no, it's too dangerous to go down there, it's too dark. That's how big it was. You could hear bats fluttering around, and water dripping from the ceiling. This is a coral cave. And this is where our ancestors were kept after they were captured and before they were put on the ships that took them to Oman. And there's a whole series of these that I'd never heard of before. So people kept appearing, just strange things happened. And the only thing, this is a photograph I took, how beautiful it is, but what a sordid history it has. And this is I'll talk about this in a moment, but this is interesting too, because this is where the African women were killed by the Arabs after they became pregnant. The Arabs were more than content to use them and exploit them sexually. But if they became pregnant, they took them there and they slaughtered them there. They cut their throats. And now you have this fountain in the church built on top of that. And that's the exact spot in the church where the slave market was. It's built right on top of that. That's the church. And that's the monument to enslaved Africans. I'm going to show you a bigger picture of it in Zanzibar. And this, I think, was constructed by a Swedish woman around 30 years ago. You may have seen it. Now, what I found out, I got another guide who took me around in the church, or right next to the church, and he says, this was one of the dungeons inside. And I went down those steps, and this is what I found. Now, the enslaved Africans had to lay on that by the Arabs. They would lay on top of that. And down here was the toilet. Okay? You defecated, you urinated there. And when you died, they would throw your body down there. And eventually, the water from the sea would wash it out. I picked up some of those chains, very heavy. And they were forced to keep those on even inside the dungeon. And so there's a male side and there's a female side, and they were full to capacity. There was never enough room. This is what the Arabs did. And are still doing. Even in the parts of the Arab world where slavery has been abolished, it only happened recently. Like Saudi Arabia, I think slavery was abolished in 1926. In Kuwait, like 1940. And these are the actual chains that the Africans were forced to wear. During the slave trade, these two underground rooms, because there were more than 40 of them, these are the two that have been preserved, were used to keep slaves before being taken to the market for auctioning. A small hut was on top, and there was a big hole used as entrance to the slave chambers. Slaves were kept in terrible conditions. So many died of suffocation and starvation. The amount was terrible. The only major difference between the transatlantic slave trade and the Arab or East African slave trade was the volume, not the conditions. And Africans were taken from Rwanda, Burundi, Kenya, Ethiopia, Mozambique, Tanzania. And Zanzibar was the slave island. And they were put there because it was hard for them to escape. And from there, the Arabs would take them to Oman, and then oftentimes to other destinations. But you saw the black people in Oman that I showed you. And those are the descendants of those enslaved Africans. Now you notice that 4 of them have chains around their neck, and one does not. He was the overseer. He was a slave himself, but he had a little bit of higher rank, and so he didn't have to wear the chain around his neck. We have people like that today. We call them collaborators. There are other names for it. And it's so touching to see these and to imagine what they went through. So I took a lot of pictures. Now this, just the section on Zanzibar, I could give a seminar on. All the things that happened. And this is the guy who was largely responsible. He was the biggest slave trader. His name was Tippu Tip. And he was born in Zanzibar. And he had an African parent and an Arab parent, and he saw himself as an Arab. Now, a lot of things happened that weren't pleasant. For example, there's a, how do I say it, a caption. All these photographs, all these exhibits in the museum that I was telling you about in Stonetown at the church. And one of them was about a sister, an African woman, who had been enslaved wrongly and had a court case. And the court case was decided in her favor. And the penalty was, she was compensated 40 rupees. I don't know what that would be in currency today, 40 rupees. And the judge asked, what are you going to do with the money? And she said, I'm going to buy some slaves. You see? So I asked a brother, another guy, I said, shouldn't we call this the Arab slave trade rather than the East African slave trade? He said, oh no. He says, because before the Arabs were involved, the British were involved. And before the British were involved, the Portuguese were involved. And he says there were Africans involved too. That's sad, isn't it? But this is something we have to come to grips with. The most sensitive part to me of African history is the role of African people themselves. Okay? It's very delicate stuff. That some African people were actually involved in this horrible process. They may not have seen themselves as Arabs. As I say, Tippu Tip amassed a vast fortune. And he saw himself as an Arab, even though you see what he looked like. Now, one last odd thing happened, and I could have shown some more pictures, but we're running short of time, so let me just mention this. Very interesting. The first night I got there, I just chilled at the hotel. Second day, I mentioned I went to the slave quarters, not slave quarters, but the church, slave auction. Taxi driver dropped me off, took me next day to the caverns. I think it's called Mangapani Coral Cavern or something like that. We went there, I wasn't expected to do that. Now, the taxi driver told me he was going to drive me to the airport when I got ready to go and drive me around. I never saw him again. And I gave him a lot of money. So you would think he would want to come back and get some more. Because it was Ramadan and things were slow, and he was talking about how he wasn't getting any business and how he had a wife and children. You would think he would have come back. But I never heard from him again, and I stayed in the same hotel. And that was very odd to me, never got a phone call or anything. So I'm thinking, after that, well, I'm done now. Okay, I can relax and enjoy myself in Zanzibar. And then it occurred to me that I wanted to go back to that church and get more information. And it also occurred to me that I didn't ask a single question about resistance to enslavement. So I went back. And this time, this time I said, I'm going to get a tour guide at the dungeon, the church, whatever, the auction. And he took me around. And we talked for a long time. Mostly we just talked about it. We just sat and he took me through some dungeons and stuff. And I left and that was the end of it. I'm thinking, that's all, every day I'm saying that's it. So the next morning, I decided I had another free day. I had enough of slavery. And I would just walk around Stonetown. And I walked for a little while and I'm sitting down minding my own business and the tour guide walked right in front of me. I didn't even see him come. I'm like just, chilling like that. And next thing I know, he says, you remember me? And I had to look for us. I said, you're the tour? He said, yeah. I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm off today. And I was just walking down and I saw you. And I would come and introduce myself. Now that was very odd. So I said, is there anything else you can show me? He says, yeah, there are a few things. So he started talking about these doors on the houses in Stonetown. That are, yes, they are beautiful. And they have carvings on there. But the carvings are symbolic. And based on the carvings, you could tell if this was one of the places where the enslaved Africans were kept hidden from the British. So he said, would you like to see some? I said, yeah. So we started walking, and he says, oh, by the way, Tippu Tip's house is just right down there. He said, would you like to see it? I said, yeah. So we walked to his house where he lived. Now there was a big yellow tape in front of the house because there had been a building had collapsed. And he said, "You still want to see it?" I said, "Yeah." So we went underneath the tape. We weren't supposed to be there. So we saw the house, and he gave me a lecture about Tippu Tip and the history of the Arab slave trade right in front of his house. And I have the videotape. I'd be happy to share it with you. So he said, "Okay, are you ready to go see the doors now?" And I said, "Yeah, we'll go see the doors." So we start walking. And he says, "Oh, by the way, Tippu Tip is buried right there." And we just walking down, she said, "Oh yeah, by the way, Tippu Tip is buried right there." And it was a trash heap. The local people know who this guy is, and they don't respect him. So they use his tomb as a trash heap. And that was the way the whole trip was. Things that I didn't plan, didn't anticipate, didn't enjoy, but it was like the ancestor said, "Runoko, you need to know this so you can tell our story." And that's what I've tried to do tonight. The African presence in the Arab world and the Arab presence in the African world is a tragic part of history that is still going on today. When we hear about sisters and brothers being sold for just a few dollars in Libya in 2000, it's heartbreaking. It brings us to mind Marcus Garvey, who asks, "Where's the black man's army, his navy, his men of big affairs? Who protects us as a people today?" And so these are profound questions. Now normally I would give a presentation and talk about queens of the Nile, or black people in ancient Egypt, or the African presence here and there, but sometimes we just need to sit and reason with each other and talk about the parts of history that are not glamorous, the parts that don't necessarily make us feel good, but things we must come to grips with. And that's what these brothers have asked me to come out and share with you tonight. So I hope we were able to, I hope it was effective. Forgive the delay. It took us a long time to get it together, but we got it together because it's so important for you to see the photographs. Okay? Now let's have some discussion.